All right, we're live now. Well, today on Ball Watching, we're joined by Earnie Stewart. Earnie is the first ever and the current sporting director at U.S. Soccer Federation. Prior to this role, Ernie played professionally in Holland, as well in the U.S. and the MLS, and for a lot of years on the U.S. men's national team. So since his retirement, he's had plenty of various roles within soccer, some clubs in Holland, and some clubs here in the MLS. And then now, like I said, at U.S. Soccer Federation. Ernie, it's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ernie, so our podcast here, Ball Watching, is really focused on St. Louis City SC, the new MLS expansion team coming to St. Louis. We're stoked about it, but we're also stoked about soccer and just generating fandom, period. And St. Louis has some of the best fans, and we're a little bit biased here, but definitely going to be showing up for all the national team programs and games in the men's and women's, and even some of the youth sides as well. So definitely, we just wanted to make that connection, and we're going to kind of do a little bit of World Cup programming coming out here shortly. It's going to be a blast of a time, and I think with this new shift to the November December timeframe, it's going to be a unique experience for the World Cup and an exciting time for fans of all ages and experience. So I think Justin's got our first question for you today to get us kicked off.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Ernie. Want to throw it way back for you, all the way back to childhood. I know it's a little pretty unique for a U.S. men's national team player, being born in the Netherlands, father from the U.S. and the Air Force, mother is Dutch. What was that like, kind of growing up in the Netherlands? And obviously, probably just had a ball attached to your foot when you were born. But how was it kind of growing up and playing over there?
Yeah, I have to say, so I started relatively late with soccer. So when I was born, pretty much everything that we did until I was like 9 years old was evolved around all American sports. So I went to the American school in Ude, where I grew up, and so my connection was more towards the American sports as baseball and softball that I played there. But I did have a connection with my Dutch family, obviously through my mother, and my nephew Michael Bolts is his name, is kind of like got me into soccer. So we would play a lot of times in their backyard in Gemert, of all places, in the backyard, and that's where I kind of grew my love for soccer. But compared to Dutch kids, I started relatively late at 11 years old
Oh, wow.
to play soccer, and it was actually at the moment that I also transitioned from the American school to a Dutch school. Because we'd have to travel. I'd have to travel daily, like an hour and 15, hour and 30 minutes in a bus
Wow.
there, and an hour and 15, hour and 30 back. And my mother was not a big fan of that at such a young age. Just to go from elementary school to high school, which was in Soesterberg in Holland at the time. And so I transitioned to a Dutch school, and that's actually where I transitioned from the American sports, being on base at the time, to a club level U19 in Holland, in the town that I grew up, through some friends of mine, and but first and foremost through my nephew, who like gave me the opportunity to play the game of soccer, in the sense in the backyard, and where I grew my affection towards the round ball that we all love to this day. Yeah.
Love it. Did it run in the family at all, Ernie? I know you said your nephew kind of helped foster that for your parents. Either one of them have soccer?
No, 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 not at
Okay.
all. My mother ran track, and my father was, he says, a really good American football player in Houston, Texas. So
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's very interesting. So you get into soccer a little bit later than most Dutch kids do, but obviously you had a great successful career. You played extensively in Holland, and then you made it to the MLS, and I think you won an MLS Cup as well in the short time there, which is awesome to come in and do some damage right away. How do in your playing experience, and I'm sure it's evolved a lot, but how do those two leagues kind of compare between Holland at the top tier and the MLS here, in your opinion?
yeah, so I have to say, during my career, that, and as a player, but two, in the role that I have now, I've been asked that question a lot of times, and the thing is, I don't think you can compare them, in
Mm.
the sense that it's it's very hard to compare just because it's two totally different cultures. Where I would say that the Dutch culture is very much around when you have the ball, what you do when you have the ball. So everything is very much possession oriented. That's kind of like their default of how they grow up. Whereas MLS is I'd say, like, when it comes to athleticism and the power in the game itself, is something that's at a really high standard. So they're so different from one another. Where I think if you just take an average MLS team that would have to play in Holland, they would find it really difficult to play in Holland. However, if you take an average Dutch team and put them in MLS, they would find it really difficult to play in MLS because the game is so different. And I would actually compare MLS soccer more to the Bundesliga, like in the way that the game is played, and
Yeah.
the athleticism and the tempo of the game, but also like the endurance that players have to go through. I think those are more comparable than the Dutch league versus the MLS. But they're both unique in their own way. And once again, I think on both sides they would find it very difficult to play in each other's league because the demands are just different.
That's a great point. No, that's a great point. I've definitely watched some share of Dutch soccer. We don't have as much of that on cable here, but I catch some PSV and some Ajax, definitely the Champions League and Europa League, but
Right.
totally different. I can't agree any more than that. But that's a good analysis. I love that comparison.
I was going to say with the Bundesliga as well, when you think about Holland coming over to Man City, you can see the sheer size from Bundesliga to EPL, even just that comparison of different leagues. And like you said, I think it would be difficult to replace one of the teams in one of the leagues just by the sheer style of play that they have and the strength that he has up top. But couldn't agree more.
I'd have to say it'd be hard to replace him too. For
That is very true.
What a player! Wow.
Oh,
Unreal start.
You meet some players sometimes that I think he can play in every single league that there is. Like, sometimes you see a player and you think, this player is good for Spain and this player is good for the Bundesliga or Holland or the United. But this player is actually one that I would say it doesn't matter where he plays. He has the strength, he has the speed, he's technical, he finishes well. Like, he can play anywhere. What a player! Yeah, absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Slots in at every forward for every national team. I would think you'd be a fool to turn down Erling at this point, and he's so young still.
Yeah, he sure is.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I think with that kind of transitioning into national teams, wanted to kind of move into the U.S. with a little bit of background on you, with over 100 caps, still in the top 10 goal scorers, I believe, for the U.S. men's national team. Probably the most memorable one for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the game-winning goal against Colombia in the '94 World Cup, which gave us the first World Cup victory since 1950. What was that game like, throwing it way back in the day, knowing that we're starting to prepare for the World Cup coming up here this winter? I mean, how would you compare the style of play and the teams and the World Cup back then?
Yeah, I think the game has evolved. So I always find it very difficult to, we played this way and that way, and we are just as good or whatever. So, the times have evolved. I think the game then was just different from the game now. Now the game is very much about decision making in tight spaces under stress, and like the amount of games that they play in a season, like the physicality that comes with it and the endurance that players have to have over a longer period of time, with Champions League, with cup games, with international games, league games. Like, the amount of games that they're playing right now compared to when we played is just, it's gone to a different level. So it's hard to compare those generations with one another, because the game just asks a different way. But '94 in itself was an amazing event. I know that people say every single year that the World Cup is the best thing, but I still believe that the World Cup in the United States in '94 was the best ever. And I think 2026 is actually going to be even better than that.
Love it.
So, beautiful runway towards great things. And then regarding myself, to the beginning of your question, like, I was so young that like I was so focused on my own performance that I actually forgot to enjoy how great it was. And I
Mhm.
actually had that for 94 and 98, and 98 was far from anything that we'd ever hoped for. It was just a disaster, and in one, the environment, and then in the end the result that we had, so that was not good. But 94, I was so young that I was so concerned about myself and how I played and all that you just forget about the tournament and how great it is to be part of something so special. So that I can say, like, my memories of 94, they just went by in a flash.
Oh yeah.
Where 2002 on the other side, when I was just older, and also before the tournament, like, when you become older and a little bit more experienced, you can
Mhm.
handle situations a little bit better than you did. So when I went into that World Cup, I told myself, no matter what happens, I need to make sure that I enjoy this as well. And I can talk about that from the day one when we were in training camp to the last day that we played. It's all very vivid in my memory. While 94 is a total, I remember bits and pieces of it. And the crazy part is that I remember after the game that I went to go do my laundry. I still remember that to this day. Like, we're
Of
staying
all the
in
things,
a
yeah.
hotel, and I went to a laundromat to do my laundry. The next day we had the day off. I remember that kind of stuff, but then other stuff like how the locker room was, and
Yeah.
who sat with. I just don't remember that kind of stuff. So there are moments that I remember, but it's weird how, you when you're young, you think about different things
Yeah.
that take away from the great experience
Absolutely.
that it actually should have been.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you still remember being the first ever African American captain for the U.S. men's national team. Which World Cup was that? 94 or 98?
No, that was 2002.
That was
Okay.
2002. Okay,
Yeah,
how was that? I guess I mean I'm assuming so that one you definitely already said that you remember a lot
yeah, but
more.
hands down, my most proud moment, and not necessarily being the first African American to do that but it was more like I remember growing up as a young child that I when I was watching World Cups, that I dreamed of, like, one, being at a World Cup, then two, um, yeah, going out and being the captain. I remember that was like
Mhm.
a dream, and that was actually a dream that came true. And I can tell you this: I was so nervous, not for the game, but I was actually nervous because it was the first game against Portugal, and that you have to line up, and then the dignitaries come out, and then you have to introduce your teammates. And I was like, I gotta nail all these names. Well, you know. So I remember that I thought that was like a really exciting moment. But I can say, and I remember having a conversation with Bruce Arena after we got knocked out against Germany, and we were just talking on the flight back, and I told him that was, like, hands down the best moment I've had in all national team. My all the games that I played, that was the moment that I don't say that very often, but that I was really proud that I was able to lead our country out and our players out for that first game against Portugal.
That's incredible. I mean, I feel like a lot of kids growing up playing soccer would dream of that very moment to be able to lead your country and your hopes and dreams out to the field to take on some of the world's best superpowers and in the great game. But incredible, and what an illustrious playing career that you had, and you parlayed all of that success into being able to take on these front office, very important positions and lead these clubs into the future. And part of what we try to do in this podcast, Ernie, is kind of not assume that everyone knows what certain components of soccer are, whether that's style of play, that's acronyms or certain pieces of commentary. But even your role, Ernie, could you kind of talk us through what a sporting director, or specifically at United States Soccer Federation, what is your role, kind of in layman's terms, or what could you kind of tell in an elevator pitch to someone that you do?
Yeah. So, what I've been hired for, and I started first as a GM for the national team for the men. And what I learned along the way is kind of like, the pathway that I had from going from the field to the front office at first VV Venlo, NAC Breda, and then AZ Alkmaar in the Philadelphia Union. The sporting director is or technical director, however you want to call that, is responsible for the technical pathway and the development pathway of young athletes growing up to be the best versions of they can be, and then I'd say creating environments that all players can reach that level to being the best versions of who they can be, and that can be very broad. Now, my role at U.S. Soccer is a little different in the sense that I oversee both male and female sides. Then there's the performance side when we talk about our youth national teams, our extended national teams, and our senior national teams. That is very much evolves around creating those environments that we were talking about, and creating a development pathway for our youth national team players and understanding how we want to play from a style of play perspective, so that we can guide them and make sure they have the best chance of succeeding within the sport. And then we have the development development arm, which falls under myself, where the referees, coaching education, club licensing, that is part of the element that I also oversee. So those two buckets, performance and development, that is what I oversee at U.S. Soccer. And probably the biggest challenge that we have is more on the development arm and how we're trying to elevate soccer in the United States. One, from a participation standpoint, that we want all young kids growing up with a black and white ball or whatever the color the balls are today, to grow up and love the game as much as we do. So one, making sure that we create a broad base, and that we then create, I'll start with a fun, safe, and healthy environment for kids to grow up and love the game just as much as we do, because then, and then providing a development pathway that kids can, once again, be the best versions of themselves as they can be. So it's a very broad spectrum, but once again, performance is one based, the teams in itself and making sure that we perform. And then two is the development space, that we're trying to create environments for kids to have a fun, challenging, safe environment.
It's such a deep and large responsibility. I feel like, to have that role, and you've experienced and led and played probably a significant part in a lot of the successes that have even come recently with, you think about the collective bargaining agreement and the equal pay. You think about the men's team, qualifying in for the World Cup. You think about the women retaining their title. You think about the Olympics and the men's qualifying for that as well again. So a lot of great successes. And I saw an article recently with you, Earnie, that, those are great. And I'm sure you're proud of those, but something that people probably don't talk as much about is some of what you were alluding to there and that's like kind of your principles or your philosophy behind, how we want American soccer to look to people. And I would love for you just to share a couple highlights or components of what you kind of hope to, instill within American soccer in your tenure with U.S. Soccer.
So, great question in the sense that it's to me, it's important. It's not what I want. It's more, for me, everything revolves around culture, DNA. Like, we need to provide a product in the United States that our fans can identify with what they see on the field. That's who they are. That's what we have to represent. So no matter at what club you work at or for which country you work, I think everybody has their own specific DNA and culture around that. So that's what we started with here at U.S. Soccer, trying to identify like what that is that makes us tick as Americans. And there are certain elements to that. When you think about the do or die mentality that the Americans have and the physicality that we bring. So that's something that we always want to see on the field, but also trying to translate what we believe. Like, if you want to say you want to be world champion at one moment and have that ambition, you're going to have to adapt to the rest of the world in that. So kind of taking that culture of the winning mentality and never giving up. And that's why I also say that about Germany, because Germany is, everybody says Germany, they always get lucky because they score in the last minute. That's not luck. That's just who they are. They go until the end, until the game. And that's kind of like what we have from our perspective as well. That's something that's in our DNA. So that always has to be something that we deliver on the field. However, when we talked about, a while back about the game and how that's evolved in being a game of decision making, that's something that we need to prepare all our players for. And that is the piece that we're trying to bring together with that. And that's kind of like where Greg, myself, Flotko, Brian, Kate, that's what we're working towards, and making sure that we, one, from that development standpoint, that we're building environments for kids to actually learn that along the way. And then two is more around our senior national teams, is one, have that identity of who we are, and that never give up mentality until the last minute, because the game is never over, together with having the ball. And the most simple thing the way I can explain this is one of the things that's I say easy to organize, but I don't mean it that way, but it's kind of like defending. How do you organize to defend? That's something you can teach very simple.
Mm-hmm.
How you're going to score goals is a total different subject. And that is the piece that we concentrate on every single day, on how can we score goals. And I think we've come a long way at US Soccer, one, by identifying our style of play and how we want to do that, having principles around that on how we want to play, which then help us, from a development standpoint for kids, help us, like when we talk about personal development plans, like we can actually help. What do we want to see, and how can we then use analytics for that, or talent identification or high performance around that, because we have a specific way that we want to play and what comes with that. So we can help the talent move forward. So those are the things that and I know this sounds weird, but COVID has helped us with that, because otherwise you're in the weeds every single day of trying to perform for the next game, and you get stuck in that and ingrained in that. And that actually helped us be able to move back and really think about that. And now that implementation has been taking place through Barry Powell's, our director of technical development, has now been in place probably a year, and we're starting to see I won't call it success to that, because that just sounds like that implementation. We're starting to see what that really means for our players, mm-hmm. and how they are gelling more together, because they understand from each other the roles and responsibilities that one has towards the other, and we as a team have. So that then creates more cohesion, and I'll just call it second nature in the way that we do things. It's like driving cars. The more that you can become that in your subconsciousness, you're already doing the right things. That makes you be able to think about all the other things that happen around you. So this is how we're trying to get there. And this is something that, through my career, as we, and everybody has it in life and in their work, is like, when you get into the zone, no matter what you do, like everything, like even the wrong decisions you make seem to turn out right. It's really weird how that works, because you're in that zone, you're making these decisions. They come up naturally. But when you lose it, it's how do you get it back as quick as possible, being in the zone again. And I've spent a lot of time just for myself, like, how do I do that? And I've tried to take that together with a lot of other people and try to think about that. How can we help the talent when they're not there? Because it's never about when everybody's feeling good. It's more about when not everybody's feeling good. How can you then make sure that you can still perform? So we've been trying to take that and help our talent move forward with that. And we think we have at least our way of trying to do that. And the implementation has now taken place within our youth national teams and senior national teams. So we're pleased with the way that that's going. And senior national teams, I say that, but at the same time, they it's more about the development pathway towards the senior national teams than anything else.
I love that. The peel back the curtain on what's going on behind the scenes, and for any fans of just the U.S. as an organization, I think those are some inspiring words to hear, and that that we've got some people really thinking about a lot of this at the grassroots level, and it's not just at the senior team level, but I think we do have a couple senior team kind of thoughts, questions for you, Ernie, to kind of close us out here as we're heading into just a couple more weeks before Qatar and the men's national team kicking off. Justin, what do we have for the World Cup side?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know we're not going to ask you for any expectations, or if you were a betting man or any along those lines on what you think the U.S. will do with the group, but just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what are you most excited about with the men's team in 2022 and the women's team in 2023 with the upcoming World Cups? I mean, what are you just looking forward to the most?
I don't know. It's just the opportunity in itself, I think, is amazing. Like, just from both sides, for our men and for our women, and where we are today, and what that means. And just seeing, I'll take the men's side because our women's side is a little bit more experienced. A lot of these players have already went through it, but I'm really excited for the players that haven't been there, what that's going to mean. And on the men's side, once again, I think we don't have too many players that have played in a World Cup. One, we missed out on 2018, and there's a longer period in between. So preparing for this has been, over these 4.5 years that I've been here now, and then later on with Greg, is like, that's exciting to me to see the progress that one has been made, and two, then how that translates. Because one, it's great to qualify within CONCACAF, but then two, it's like the most important thing is, what do you do at a World Cup? That's kind of like the next stage, right? And how are we going to do that? So we feel, at least for the most part, that part has been prepared for very well, in the sense that we've played as many high-level games that we could, which was not easy at times, especially in the beginning, playing Brazil and then losing, and Mexico and all that stuff, and what the hope then of that, the fandom then at that moment is, and where that needs to get to. But those were choices that were made at the time. And now the exciting part is to see how that transitions to a World Cup, and where we are in this stage of our development, from a men's perspective. And actually, on the women's perspective, after the Olympics, you've seen some change there as well. So also there are the younger players coming through, where we're also very excited to see, to haven't seen them in World Cup qualifying, how they've done. And now preparing for the World Cup, even though the 2 losses that we've had now but just seeing, being able to play at Wembley in front of 80,000, incredible. And what kind of experience that actually gives to those players that haven't experienced that will help us then in New Zealand and Australia. So I think just the excitement for me is more around seeing those players, how they can perform in those environments.
Yeah, no, that's a great. We're stoked. I mean, selfishly, we're marking the days off the calendar, counting down until we get to our first game. It's going to be a blast of a time, and this new time frame is going to be really interesting. And the last thing we have for you, Ernie, is on the World Cup note. We mentioned 2026 coming up. How do you think that World Cup is going to play into? I'd say I mean, there's a growing interest, I think, in the game here in the States, and we have a growing fan base. People are getting a lot more exposure, and we're seeing that, especially here in St. Louis. Like, everyone's just captivated by what's going on at the club. Any piece of news, it goes viral. People are talking about, chatting about it. I'd like to say that that's a little bit more of a general assumption you can make for the country, but 2026, it's going to be here before we know it. What are your thoughts on the U.S., being obviously a partial host with Mexico and Canada as well, but I'd say more of the primary in this sense. What do you think that's going to mean to this country?
Loaded
question.
What it did in 94 and 99, and how things took off for soccer in the United States, and the start of MLS, and later on, I believe it was WUSA that what it was first named, and later on NWSL. So that one meant a lot. And I think now it's like the flywheel of like that has now been established on both sides. And I just see like this being the best World Cup ever. I just I don't see it any other way. I think one of the things that that we in the U.S. are so extremely good at is organizing events. Like I don't
Yep.
see that anywhere else. And you know, with all respect to all the World Cups that have happened, I truly feel one that the World Cup in '94 was one of the best events ever. And I can only see in 2026 that this is just going to even blow that one out of the water. Um,
Ooh.
I truly feel that, and then what that means for soccer in the United States. We already have our women who are world champion, and then we want to get to a place with our men's team where we can also start talking about those things. And I'm not saying that that's in, but
Mhm.
that's what we're preparing for. And as long as those our two teams do really well, and that's just going to create more enthusiasm behind everything that's going on, and will be that flywheel to even bigger and better. And you know, great shout out to everything that's happened in soccer in the United States, and being a relatively young sport in the United States, how
Mhm.
it's grown explosively with through a lot of people that have seen things through in very difficult times. A great thank you to those people, and now we're going to see what that does, and hopefully that just once again that's a flywheel to even bigger and better moving forward. So, and after that World Cup that we're talking about, more expansions and more teams within a huge country, and
Love to hear it.
yeah, and then those players that actually, you know, um, those stars that are created through those unique opportunities and moments will help us elevate the sport even more.
Incredible. Well, thanks again, Ernie. I mean, that you've been so generous with your time, and I know it's probably a little hectic over there considering what we have coming up here very shortly. But you know that the us and the folks in St. Louis will be fully behind the national team in a couple of weeks here and putting on our jerseys and going out to support the red, white, and blue. But we wish you the best of luck and thank you for spending some time with us today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. No problem at all.
Thanks, Ernie.
Have a great
Thank you.
day.
You too.
You too. Thanks, Ernie.
All right. Bye bye now.
See ya.
Bye.